Hi everyone, welcome to today's Defining Your MVP's Feature Set webinar. If you came along to our previous MVP webinar, welcome back. And if this is your first webinar with us, thanks for joining us. If you missed our first webinar, you can find it online on our YouTube channel, and I've just posted a link into our webinar chat room where you can find it. I'm Chloe, I'm reinteractive's community manager, and today James McGrath, our development manager, will be running our webinar. And Mikel, Lindsaar, reinteractive's founder, will be jumping in every now and then to share some examples as well. So James, if you're ready, let's get started.
Thank you, Chloe. So welcome everybody. This is our second in a series of MVP webinars, and I'm very pleased to be presenting today. Today's webinar, as Chloe mentioned, is about how to identify key parts of your application in the lead up of developing your initial MVP. Some introductions. Reinteractive, we're specialists in building and supporting software written in Ruby on Rails and Ember.js. We're a team of 20 Australian-based software professionals, and we all work remotely from around Australia. My name's James McGrath. I'm Development Manager at Reinteractive, and I'm responsible for managing teams to build software at Reinteractive. And one of my favourite things to do is to create a Greenfields project for an MVP. With us is Mikel Lindsaar. You'll probably know Mikel from around the community, but he is the founder of Reinteractive, and he's also a Rails core contributor and maintainer of a lot of different software. One in particular is the MailGem, which is, I think there's 20 million downloads and counting, so it's a pretty important piece of software in and of itself. And you heard Chloe's voice before. Oh, actually, do you want to say hello, Mikel?
Oh, g'day everyone. Thanks, James. Thought I'd say, jump in and say hello. It's great to see a bunch of people in the webinar and many names that I recognize and new ones that I don't. So welcome to all of you. And this is a series that we're going to do a few times through. So as you find out about it, recommend it to other people, and we'll get lots of people understanding what MVPs are. So it's quite exciting to be doing this, and thank you for being here.
Cool, thank you, Mikel. And also with us, you heard Chloe's voice earlier. Chloe's our community manager, and you've probably seen her around at our community events. She helps to organise InstallFest, Development Hub, and a lot of other interesting things in the community. And thank you to Chloe for getting this webinar organised. So the format for today's webinar is that we're going to speak for approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll have some time set aside at the end for question and answers. I'm going to be doing a lot of the talking today, but I'm sure Mikel is going to be having a lot of things to say, and he'll be sharing stories and examples that he has learned in his many years' experience. All right, so quick definition of what a minimum viable product is. If you came to our last webinar, you would have gotten that entire webinar was about defining what an MVP is and why it's beneficial to go for the minimum viable product. We're not going to rehash that information today, but a quick definition could be helpful for those who missed that webinar. I encourage you to check it out if you did miss it. An MVP is the minimum functionality that provides enough value to a subset of your target market that they will make repeated use of your product. So we're talking about a software product here. We're in the stage where we've got market validation and we're ready to go forward and build our first software product. And we're wanting to build the minimum amount of functionality that is going to be a viable product to get users to come back and use the product again. Okay, so the end goal of identifying your key feature set, which is what we're going to discuss today, is that we want to take your broad set of requirements, your wish list, so to speak, of features that you've identified for your product and cut that down to a much smaller feature set. The benefit being that you can develop that feature set a lot more quickly and allow you to get to market a lot quicker and then start your iteration process in partnership with your users instead of in isolation. So we want to go from that complex set of functionality to a much more simple set of functionality. But that's easier said than done. How can you reduce your feature set? And how are we going to identify those features that are not essential to your MVP's launch? Well, today's webinars are going to be about identifying some techniques and thought processes we can go through that help us to make those decisions. And at the end, we'll tie that together with an example that puts those into play. All right. So the first thing that we can do to help us to cut down on the size and scope of our MVP is to identify our MVP's target audience. We might have a grand vision of our product, and it's going to be it's going to target a lot wider spectrum of people, but we're not going to be able to target all of those users at the start. We're going to want to try to target a much reduced set of users, because our MVP is not, we can't produce enough functionality to be all things to all people. What we want to do is reduce our diversity of our users, and that is going to allow us to reduce the diversity of their requirements. The more homogeneous our user set is, the simpler our requirements are going to be to solve their problems. So if we can appeal to a smaller, well-defined list of users, we can cut down on the scope of the product. So what are some of the ways we can divide up our users? Let's have a look at some of the good ways that we've identified of dividing up users, and give some examples of those. So one of the first ways we can do it is by location. It's sometimes easy to divide up users because of their geographical location. They're physical beings, so often people, when they're located in similar areas, they have similarities. This is by dividing up your users by location can be a really great way, especially for market-based products or for network-based products. So if we're looking at network-based products, these are things like social network, where you're bringing a number of users together that are of similar nature, and you're trying to connect them and build value by creating that network. A market-based product is where you're trying to bring different groups of users together so that they can trade. We're thinking buyers and sellers, like with Groupon or eBay or Gumtree. So the reason location works really well for these types of products is there's often a location element to the product. For example, if we're looking at the market-based products like Groupon, often the sellers of a product are going to be selling an item that is quite geographically specific. For example, Groupon, they sell coupons to restaurants, and if you're going to be buying a coupon to go visit a restaurant, you really want the people who are going to buy those coupons are going to be located close to those restaurants. You're not going to sell many coupons for restaurants in Sydney to people in Melbourne, because they're just not going to be able to use them. So Groupon, one of their key to their successes was they identified this pretty early on, and they focused in on just one city. I think it was Chicago, and that allowed them to target their product a lot better. Similarly, Facebook is another good example of honing in on a specific area. They didn't start off with all of the world. They didn't even start off with all of America or even just one city. They honed in on just one university campus, Harvard, and once they'd got a foothold in Harvard, they then moved to another university and then another, and slowly they expanded until they were all universities in the US, and then they went from that point to expanding beyond those universities. And okay, so yes, that makes it a lot easier. If we can divide up our users by location, it's going to get certain products, it's going to make it a lot easier to get them off the ground. It can also help with reducing the set of functionality that you are trying to provide to those users. For example, you could drop features like geolocation searching, time zone logic, which is always, from my experience, a really fiddly thing to create and get right. My developers are always trying to find new ways of handling that logic. You're going to get rid of some complex matchmaking logic if you're going to just have everybody already in the same location. You won't need to try to, you may not need to provide matchmaking logic. And other things like it makes it simpler to seed your data. So if you have got like a market-based product, you might need to seed it with lots of different deals or products that are selling. It's much easier to seed that data if you're dealing with one location. And I think, Michael, you had some good examples that you want to talk about.
Yeah, there's another really key part about this, which with regards to an MVP, a lot of people always think that MVP is related to the cost or complexity of developing the software. And we are going to go about that further in future slides. But there's another really key point is that if you're reducing your network or you're reducing your market to a really small location, like say your local suburb or your local city, wherever you might be, that also gives you a really great way to sort of kickstart your community. Because if you've got, say, 100 users and you started your MVP to be Australia-wide or worldwide, those 100 users might be scattered from, you know, here to Berlin, and you might only have 1 or 2 locally. But say you restricted the sign up or you restricted your marketing efforts to only hit Sydney. All of your Facebook ads were Sydney, all of your LinkedIn ads were targeted at Sydney, all of your Google ads were targeted in people that are in Sydney, and then you build up this community in Sydney. Well, what that means is that you could actually go out and invite a whole bunch of your users, all of your early adopters, into a meeting with you. And you could go over the feature set with them, you could tell them that they're really loved, you could communicate with them, they could express what they think is great about your product, and that would actually give you a massive kickstart in terms of building your network of people and network of clients that are using your product, because they're obviously going to trust you more as well, especially if they're feeling like that you've taken time out of your week to listen to their thoughts and feelings. And then what better group of ambassadors would you need or could you have when you then went interstate or international? You'd have this massive list of following of clients that thought you were fantastic because you took the time out to actually visit them. I mean, have a think about that, right? How many of you have ever had a phone call or visited in person, let alone a phone call, from a SaaS product that you use? You know, it would be very small. And in fact, that sort of thing, that sort of personal contact will definitely improve your ability to go into the future. So yeah, the next thing that, go ahead, James.
I was going to say that you make a really good point there, Michael, and we're going to explore that a little bit later on. The fact that your ideal user is going to be someone who is easy to communicate with, and if they're located nearby, that makes it a whole lot easier to get in touch with them. So it's a really good point you've just made. All right, so that's one way we can divide up our users by location. Another way that we've found successful is to break up users by their technical sophistication. So I'm thinking along the lines of sophisticated users versus inexperienced or newbie users who don't know systems very well. Now, a reason a sophisticated user might be better to target is that they're more advanced in their thinking and less likely to need support. So it means that you can spend less time creating support materials and spend on the phone or with your support tools looking after those people, and more time on building other parts of your business or software. They're less likely to need polished interfaces and more willing to deal with things like bugs. Sophisticated users, they're often on the cutting edge. They have seen and used a lot of different software, so they're going to be more understanding when a bug pops up. An inexperienced user might not realize bugs are often part of software. And so if you're dealing with those inexperienced users, you might need to have, fix all the bugs in your system before launching. But with a more sophisticated user, you might think, well, that bug, it's not so important that it's going to stop our launch. Another good point for sophisticated users is that they typically use more advanced tools like their browsers. Reinteractive makes a lot of web-based software, and we've found it really painful sometimes to deal with older browsers. You can add many hours of work trying to support old Internet Explorer versions. I think we try to steer all clients away from Internet Explorer 6, and we're beginning to steer them away from Internet Explorer 7, and hopefully sometime soon, when Internet Explorer 8 goes below a certain percentage, we can start steering them away from that as well, because dealing with those old browsers is a real pain in the neck for a software developer, because they're so fiddly and they do things in different ways, and they don't support some of the newer features that you would like to see in your Fandangle product. Another good reason for technical sophisticated users, they might be a superior choice, is that they can do things with less. They're more willing to find workarounds and use tools in interesting ways. So you could learn some things and see how users actually want to use your product, instead of providing them with a limited set of features that corral the users into a certain way of using the system. If you target those sophisticated users and provide them with quite flexible tools, they might teach you a bit of one or two things about how they're going to use the system, which would be much better than trying to guess what they're going to use the system for. I can think of an example. Oh, go on. Yep.
Yeah, I just thought I'd jump in there. I mean, obviously James will probably give you his example in a second, but another really key point on what James was talking about with the browsers and with the polished interface. We had this client about maybe 2 years ago, and they came into us, and their application would have worked really well just as a normal web application that had, create, read, update, destroy type pages on it, and you edited things and opened a new page and you fixed it, you went to the next page and you did that, and you just moved around the application, right? We could have made it really fast, could have worked happily, and would have gotten them an MVP. But somehow one of the stakeholders got it into their head that they really wanted a single page, fully JavaScript-based app as part of their MVP. And I got to say, I spent hours trying to convince them otherwise. But they went ahead that way, and I mean, that was fine. They were willing to pay for it, and they wanted to do it. And we produced a product that worked. It had this multi-panel interface, and you could drag and drop between panels and all sorts of things. And it turned out that the users that were using it had a steeper learning curve trying to figure it out because it was so cutting edge. And it turned out that the users, when asked, they didn't really care either way. They were quite happy with using it in another direction. And that's just an indicator that you could pour a lot more money into adding some more features instead of building a really polished, cutting-edge interface on the front of it. Because really, what you're trying to build is something for the users to solve some sort of pain point. And if you can put more money into that, then you're going to solve more pain points, and your users are going to be happier. So this technical sophistication can cover a lot of areas, and the more you can cut back, the better.
Cool. Thank you, Michael. So I was going to give a quick example of a startup that I know that they wanted to provide lots of reporting information for their users, but to get their product released earlier, they ended up releasing just providing access to the raw data in a CSV format, and that allowed their users to import that data into Excel and create their own reports. And they could do that because they were dealing with technically sophisticated users at the start. So that there's lots of benefits from targeting those technically sophisticated users. But as with all things, it depends. Sometimes it can be good to target less sophisticated users because they might have a much simpler use case, and you can satisfy their needs a lot easier. So it really depends on what your product is, and so make that decision. You need to make that decision when thinking about your product. It's got to be made in context. All right, so that's technical sophistication. Another way to divide up your users is by interest. If you might be creating a product that spans many different interests. So you might have, I'm thinking of an example of Amazon. We all know Amazon as the mega place to shop online. You can buy just about anything on Amazon. I think you can buy car parts and toothpaste, DVDs and books. But they didn't start off initially when Amazon first launched. They didn't start off with all those different products. They started off with just books, and that allowed them to really simplify their front end and back end. Well, so their software was a lot simpler, but they'd also it wasn't just their software that was simpler. It simplified their distribution networks, their marketing messages. It really simplified their whole business. And once they'd perfected that model of selling books online, then they started expanding their market, and they started adding other products like DVDs, which are similar to books, and gradually they opened it up until their systems were all in place and they could offer products for everything, every single product you can imagine. And Michael, you've got a good example of one of a client of ours, TwoShare.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So TwoShare is a company that does sharing. So we helped them build their first cut of their product about a year ago. And what they built was this way that you could share things that you no longer used or needed. So, say you had a toy racing car and you used it for a while, or your kids used it, they didn't want it anymore, it was in good condition, and you wanted to give it away, but you didn't want to dump it inside a St. Vinny's bin because you knew it would get broken. TwoShare came up with a system where you could share that item for free and give it away to someone, and as a result you earn some credits that you can then request items from other people and not have to pay the postage. So it's a really good sort of sharing network. But when they were starting, obviously you could do anything, and you could choose any group of products to do that. And they were actually, I have to say, really smart. They chose baby products as their first thing to share. And this is a genius stroke when you think about it, because baby products normally only last about a year or two before the child grows out of it. And it's not something that you need to sort of hang around or keep around for, 30 or 40 years or 20 years. Usually people have one or two kids or three or whatever, but they're usually fairly close together. And the parents would, end up with a stroller that they just don't need anymore. And they can, of course, sell it, but the TwoShare network allowed them to give it away. So they focused on these baby products. And it went through to the whole, networking and the whole way that they ran their business, from their Facebook ads to everything else. And as a result of focusing on this one market, they actually managed to pull in these really good strategic partnerships with, mother groups around Australia and all sorts of things. So it really changed the focus of the business. And now that they got started, then they started adding all these other categories. And if you go to their website now, which I think is just twoshare.com, TUSHARE.com, you can see that they're doing a whole bunch of different products. And that's a really good example of the MVP starting at a small size and in a certain interest and then going out from there. So yeah. So the next one that James is going to talk about, I believe, is company size.
Company size. That's right. And we might need to start hurrying things along because we're running a bit late. So another way to divide up your users would be by company size if you're targeting businesses. One of our clients is developing a product for HR departments. Big companies have different HR structures than little companies. This product is going to be sold into eventually all sizes of companies, but they're concentrating on small businesses first because they can simplify a lot of their interface because the way the hierarchy of users or employees in those companies is going to work makes this functionality a lot simpler. Similarly, Xero started off concentrating on accounting for small businesses rather than all sizes of businesses. And as they added more functionality, they grew to be able to handle the needs of bigger and bigger businesses. But they started off with those small businesses first because they had simpler needs. I'd like to skip through down to that ways to divide your users slide, Michael. Great. So just a quick summary, we can divide our users in by lots of different ways. We've gone through location, technical sophistication, interest or industry, company size, and there's other ways we can do it, which are, we could think of many ways to divide up those users.
Actually, I've just got one on those two industry segments and marketing position. Just to give people an example of what that is, that's simple. We have one client who's building a product that once they've built it, they could sell it to many companies, and it's a business-to-business product as opposed to business customer. And these sorts of business-to-business products can be quite complex because you have to really hit a pain point, and a lot of businesses already have a really good idea on how they're going to do what they want to do. And what they've done is they've chosen one company to sell this to. Right? And then they got an agreement with that one company to sell this product to them, and they've got a contract on it, and they're building the tool to make sure that it fulfills the need of that customer. And once that's built and that's live, they're then going to take that now minimum viable product and add in the ability to have multiple customers with multiple logos and multiple different companies, so that they can then sell it to many other companies. So by picketing one industry and right down to one target client, in this case, that becomes an MVP, and then it proves that this thing can work and someone can find use out of it. So that can also be part of how you do your marketing positioning and that sort of thing. You can really just narrow it right down in some cases, especially with the business-to-business stuff where you're not talking about $10 a month to use the service. It might be some other remuneration process where you might be earning thousands of dollars a month, or you might be earning per use of it, or any sort of thing like that. So that's a couple of points. So next thing James is going to dive into is the ideal user. I
was just going to say that there are many. These are the examples we've given for dividing up users are just some of the many different ways. Pretty much you could divide up your users by any defining characteristic that might separate them. There's lots of other things that I can think of, like technological tribes, like are they a Apple user versus a Windows user? Market role, are they a high-end or low-end? Income levels, age groups, marketing position. There's so many different ways to divide up users, and if you can find it, it's just you've got to sit down and look at your broader market and think about how those users divide into different groups. All right, so let's talk about how factors for identifying those ideal users, because we can divide up our users, but how do we know which ones are the best ones to go for? And the ideal user is someone that is going to be interested in a simple value proposition that you can really hone down your application to address. They're going to be people who have a bit of money to spend. It's an important part of business that you want your customers to be willing to spend money on your product. So an ideal user segment is going to be someone who has money to spend, especially if they're going to spend on they're willing to spend on that problem that you're thinking you can resolve for them. Another good characteristic of that ideal user is that if you can identify thought leaders or trendsetters, that's going to be really a powerful way to break into a larger market. A lot of people will turn to their technically minded sons or daughters who know technology when they're looking to buy a new telephone or computer. If you're going to make your products appeal to that segment of the market, then they're going to help you get into a larger market of parents and other, family and friends of those technically minded people. Another point that we raised before is you want to be able to get in contact with those ideal users easily. If you can't talk to your users, you're not going to be able to learn from them. So as Michael mentioned, sometimes your ideal user is someone who's just located down the street from you and you can go and visit them. All right, so that's how some of the thoughts we need to put into identifying our ideal users. And then the next thing we need to be thinking about when we're defining our feature set is what are the key problems we're trying to solve for those users. Our products really need to solve a problem or fulfill a need that we've identified for our users. So if we've identified that subset of users, part of that process is going to be to identify the problems we can solve for that particular subset. And if we've got a list of problems, that's a great start, but we want to really hone in on some key problems that we're trying to solve. Because if we're trying to solve every single problem that they've got, we're not going to be able to produce an MVP in a quick fashion. So the fewer the problems we're trying to solve, the better. So if you can identify the biggest pain points for your target market, that's the ones we should concentrate on trying to solve, because they're going to be the ones that are more willing to, their customers are more willing to pay for and try out your product if it actually solves their problems. All right, so we're talking about cutting features from this list of our wish list of features, but sometimes we need to think about things in not just cutting of features, but we can cut other things as well. So not just functionality, but we could cut things like polish. Does the website or the not just website but application, does it need to be polished? Sometimes a simple interface will suffice. If they're often business users will be willing to put up with quite generic looking interfaces if it solves their problem. So we might not need to spend so much effort and time on design. Can we provide flexible functionality instead of specific functionality that's going to allow our users to experiment and solve their own problems? Because sometimes that flexible functionality is a lot simpler to create than to create functionality that really corrals our users into using the product how we want them to use it. We can think about targeting certain browsers or operating systems. Do we want to target tablets versus phones or desktop? Can we cut the support for desktop if we think we're going to just target phones and tablets? That could be a great way of cutting down on the scope of the product. Different operating systems. You might say, I'm going to target Windows, but should I target the last 5 versions of Windows or just the latest and greatest version? We can also think about cutting processes that and functionality that is important for scalability, but at an early stage when we're just launching, it may not be important at all. When we've got 10 users, we can do a lot of stuff by hand rather than writing software to do it. Once we start to have scaling issues with that process, that could be the point that we go and write software for them. But until we know that
a really good a really good one on that one, James, on the which ones can we do by hand as opposed to automating, is billing. I have been involved with and personally done and also seen a few startups where when they start, they have no way to bill their clients. Even though all their users are signing up, they have absolutely no way to bill the clients. And the way they handled that was they did all of their billing manually. The first 10 or 20 users that signed up, they actually called them and got their credit card details over the phone and set up the billing account and just did it manually with their bank so that they didn't have to worry about billing the client or writing all of that logic. And once they got up to 50 users, well, that means they'd have to do 1 bill a day sort of thing, or one or 2 bills a day through their existing accounting system. So there are a lot of areas that you can cut which doesn't impact the user experience, and actually in some cases makes it better, because if you're actually contacting your users to bill them, you can also ask them, how did you find out about the product? What do you think about it? What can we improve? So you can use these things that you cut as actual opportunities to move forward. And putting a billing system in place is not trivial. It's 3 or 4 weeks of heavy work for a couple of developers, and you could use that to add a whole bunch of other features that would make your product way more interesting to get in there. So I just thought I'd jump in on that one.
No, that was an excellent example. I love that example. All right, so we know that we want to cut some features. How do we identify which ones are the ones to cut and which ones are the ones to keep? So we've got a wish list of all our features that could be great things to add to the product, but we know we want to cut a large portion of them. So really, we've got to be asking ourselves a question about each feature. And the question is this: if we remove that feature, would the user still have that problem solved? And if the answer is yes, the problem is still solved, then we can strike that feature off the list. And even if the answer might be no, we need something there, but we can then ask ourselves another question, which is, can we provide a simpler option that will be an acceptable substitute for that feature? An example, I'll go into some examples later on about this when we walk through an example application. Now, I want to make one last point about this. You've got to get into a mindset when you're cutting features. You want to be ruthless. There's a good saying that is, if you aren't embarrassed about your MVP, then you have launched too late. That really sums it up. Your first version should be it shouldn't be doing everything and meeting every expectation that you had in your mind when you first set out on your project. It might not look as polished as you want. It might be missing some features that you think are key, but the sooner you get it out into the market, the better. And I don't know if this happens to other people, but when I go to the supermarket, and sometimes I come out of the supermarket and I think, oh man, I only bought a few things, but I've been charged so much. And I think, oh, they must have overcharged me somewhere. And if I go through the receipt, it's very rare that they've actually overcharged me. But all those little items, they seem to always add up to a much bigger number than I originally expected. And it's sort of similar with software development. It's very easy to say, let's add this extra feature in. It's only going to take a couple of hours. But those hours really start to add up when you start adding dozens of features in. So if in doubt, we should leave a feature out. That's my philosophy. Because we can always go and add those features back in later if we find out that we really need that feature. Okay, so let's look at an example of creating a CMS system. We've identified that we've looked at lots of different ways to think about how to cut and identify features for your MVP. So if we work through an example, it might solidify these ideas. Let's imagine that we have identified the need in the market that we want to create simple websites for people, and we want to create a content management system. So first up, we should identify the target market. Now, it could be that we could target, a CMS can be targeted at everybody. Everybody would love to have a website, surely, but most people don't have lots of money to spend on a website, especially consumers. Businesses are going to be much more likely to spend money on their websites. But we don't want to target all businesses because there's such a wide and diverse range of businesses out there. So how about we reduce that market to just small businesses? Well, that's still pretty diverse. Lots of small businesses doing lots of different things. So how about we could reduce that further down to restaurants? Once again, restaurants. There's lots of different types of restaurants. There's sit-down restaurants, takeaway restaurants, fast food. There's lots of different sorts, and we could narrow it down to just takeaway restaurants. And to take it even to the more extreme, we could go, oh, we're going to just target pizza restaurants, because that's going to, if we reduce our number of users, potential users, we're going to reduce the need to have every feature under the sun. So if we really hone in on that target market, and then later on we can add features that can expand the product to target each one of those a greater number of users in our target market. But we'll target, if we go for takeaway pizzas, pizza restaurants right at the start, then we are much more likely to succeed. So let's have a look at some of the potential requirements for a target market. This target market, we could say that restaurants, they want to have a web presence, and the restaurant owners, they don't really, often small business people don't have time to muck around with websites. They can't, and they don't have the skills either to manage their website hosting, or their, making this design look good, or providing all, they're not going to write the software. We want to create a system that helps them to get a website up and running really quickly, that looks good. It's going to give the important information to their customers. It's like opening hours and the location, and maybe the menu on the food that is on offer at the restaurant, and allows bookings. They're our key customer requirements that we've identified. So if we've identified these key pain points and what we're trying to achieve, let's have a look at our wish list of possible features. So we've got a pretty big list here. It's lots of different things. It's not too bad. We might think, oh, that's pretty achievable, but perhaps we can cut it down even further. Cut it down because we're trying to get the product out as soon as possible. So if we've got, looking through all these possible features that we can add, we can say, okay, well, the choosable themes, that relates to the website looking good. That's a key thing that we want to provide to the customer. The calendar widget for choosing opening hours, that's great. It's going to help us display the opening hours. The Google Maps integration, it's going to display the restaurant's location. Perfect. The menu editor is going to allow us to edit and create a menu online and display it in a nice way. So it gets a tick. A booking calendar widget, so the users can send through bookings through the website. So that's going to help with bookings, so we'll give that a tick. Ordering food online, that's not so important. It's not one of the key pain points that we're looking for, so we'll get rid of that feature. A blogging engine, it's too much at the moment. Let's drop that as well. Pictures of food, that fits into the looking good category. The newsletter sign up, yeah, well, that would be great, but it's not in our key set of features, so it could be good, but let's drop that for now, because if in doubt, leave it out. All right, so is that our MVP feature set? Well, no, because a lot of those features could be simplified. If we look at each of those features, we can find simpler alternatives for a lot of those features. So, choosable themes. One of the benefits of choosing such a really focused target audience for our product of pizza restaurants is that they're going to need pretty similar requirements with regard to themes. We could just have one theme that makes a really nice looking website for pizza restaurants. So we'll go for one pizza theme, and they don't have to choose it. It's just, that's what they get. A calendar widget, well, for choosing, for specifying the opening hours, well, we could just provide them with a text box, and they edit the opening hours in a text box. Do we need Google Maps integration when we could just provide them with an address field, or get the developer to update it for them? A menu editor. Well, often we find, I would suggest that restaurants don't necessarily have time to edit their menu online as well as maintain it for inside the restaurants. They could be changing their menus all the time. So how about we just allow them to upload a menu PDF at the start? If they looking to have a menu editor later on, we can explore that after we've released our MVP. A booking calendar widget. Well, how about just allowing them to record the phone number, and people can call in to make their bookings like normal? I think that would work for our MVP. So we can simplify a lot of these different features to really cut down on the scope of that development.
Totally. And
yep.
And I think there's a key point on this for the attendees, is that you notice while we're reducing the scope of the product, we're not necessarily reducing the end user experience a great deal. And by inserting some human interaction in there, they can update the text box that has their phone numbers and whatever in it, or they can upload a PDF. You could even take it to another level. They upload the PDF, and for your first 5 customers, you're the one that goes through and edits the menu and fixes stuff up on a back-end interface that is nowhere near as pretty and doesn't have as much design. There could be a whole heap of different ways that you could do this that causes you to still be able to produce an MVP and still be able to do the most important thing with an MVP. And that most important thing is go find someone who's willing to pay you money to use it, And if you can get your MVP out to a point where you can then go find someone who pay you money to use it, then you can start validating that product. And that user will quickly tell you which is the most important feature to do next, And you can go through and start adding users and start getting these things in. So, yeah, do you have anything else on that one slide there, James?
No, I think that covers it pretty well. Thank you, Michael. I think that brings us to the end of our discussion. I think we've gone over time a bit, so apologies about that. We've got more webinars in this series planned. The next webinar is going to be about developing and launching your MVP, and it's going to be talking more about the software development process and how to choose a good team and things like that, and what to expect when developing. Chloe will be sending out an email that will give you more details about that next webinar, but also it will also include a questionnaire form, I think, Chloe, that will allow you to give feedback on this webinar, and we're always looking for feedback so we can improve for next time.
There are a couple of questions, so we'll keep on that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so one of the questions, and if you do have a question while I'm answering this one, please go to your GoToWebinar control panel, and you'll see a little questions box, and you can just type a question in there, and we'll have a look at it. So the first question that we had was from Grant, and he's asked, how do you build an MVP in such a way that it's simplified in terms of location, market, network, but with the end goal of expanding bigger without having to rebuild the whole application? And he asks other questions about the technicality of it, how do you build it stripped down with a foundation architecture and add functionality later, so that you don't have to do this massive refactor or redo of code, redo the schemas, etc. And his example comes up about the MVP and that sort of thing. I think Grant and James can sort of pitch in after what I think, I guess.
Yep. Go for it.
The key to that, Grant, is if you're building a large application like that, if you can tell the developers that this is the eventual plan, that we are building it for 1, but we're going to build it out into 3 or 4, and that's known at the start, there are ways to write the code base defensively so that you can then expand out into multiple clients or expand out that industry segment or market segment into other areas. It's not that you don't want to bring that datum up at the start, or you want to hide that from the developers to make them not do too much on it, or what have you. But you should just be in high communication with the development team and say things like, okay, yep, we're building this for this one client. Obviously, once it launches, we can go to multiple. There's also another way of doing it, which can be a simpler way, is that instead of building the logic inside the system to handle multiple clients, if they're sort of large customers like this, you might be going from 1 to, say, 10 or 20 in terms of business-to-business type things. What you could do is you can have the same code base, but you could launch 10 versions of it on servers. And we actually have a customer that's doing this right now. They've got this product which they build, and they sell it to a certain industry segment who is very concerned about security. And what they've done is they've actually turned it into a product feature. And what they say to the client is that we've got this code base. When we launch it for you, you actually get launched into your own stack of databases and servers, which no one else shares. And that's part of our cost, our monthly cost to you. And we just include that in the price. And usually for business to business, if it's a big enough product, that extra $300 or $400 a month profit or cost is not going to be a deal breaker. And then they just have 7 versions, not 7 versions of the product, but 7 installations of the product. They still do all their coding centrally, and when they push an update, it goes to all 7 instances. But that's another way that you can expand to multiple clients. You don't necessarily have to build that functionality into the product. You could build it into the way you do your operations, or you can do it in the way that you build your stack. And lots and lots and lots of companies do this. And you'll actually, if you sign up for a SaaS product, sometimes they'll say, good, thank you for signing up. We're building your SaaS product now. And what they're actually doing there is they're launching a new copy of the database just for you, so that you can set your own logo and everything. But that means that their software doesn't have to have all of this complex logic to handle which user is signed in from which company. And it also handles a whole heap of security issues as well, especially for sensitive security data. James, do you have anything else to add to that?
I think you've talked to that very well. I do think that you raise a really good point that it doesn't hurt to share your grand vision with the developers up front, even though you're wanting to concentrate on a much smaller subset of that functionality, and that way they will be able to take that into account and make decisions based on the future roadmap, not just trying to tackle that immediate MVP. So
right.
That was a good question, Grant.
Cool. Does that answer your question for you, Grant? You can just type into the chat. And is there any other questions that people have thought? Yeah, we've got another one here. And Grant, good. Cheers. Thanks, Grant. So one from David. How do you engage your focus group participants, i.e., how do you get them to be early adopters? Isn't this the question?
It's the $1 million question, I think.
That is. I think the key way to do this, and we found this in previous customers, that you can do this really successfully from a UX or user experience point of view. So say you're building a product, and I know about David's product and it's awesome, and I'm not going to talk about it here yet, but say you're building a product that is targeting, old ladies, people over the age of 60 or something, and you're targeting this very specific segment. Probably the first thing you'd want to do with a target market of any market is get some wireframes or get some drawings of the site and go and find some, and sit down with them and say, hey, we'd like to talk to you. How do you find those people? Well, you could do it many ways. I mean, you could advertise on Facebook, saying be part of a brand new thing that's happening. It's free. Come along to an info night. We're going to serve, free food and dinner. Entice them in some way to come along. And then what you want to do with that group of people is show them your vision. Show them the wireframes. You can produce a clickable demo if you like. We do that sort of thing, and we can Chloe will put a link to the case study for Flood.io where we produced a clickable demo that people can look around. And if you're not on the webinar and you're watching this later, you can just see that from our website under case studies and Flood.io. So you can build like a clickable prototype that mimics the whole system, doesn't actually handle the back-end logic very well, but just has multiple screens that you can go to. And then the trick is getting the users to play with that and work with it. And really the way that you engage your group participants is pay attention to them, and give them the beingness, give them the validation that their opinion is important, and take that data and then build your product to match it, and then call them back in again 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later and say, look, we've made changes. We'd really like your feedback.
Yeah, that's going to be a really powerful tool. I think, Michael, your point about bringing them back in and really showing that you've been listening to them and your product is being developed with their help, they're going to take a lot more ownership over that product in the end, and they will be your greatest asset when you come to sell on to that next group of people.
Yeah, a great example of that is actually Kickstarter, where the whole point of it is that you're engaging customers to pay you money to be part of something, and that's really why Kickstarter works, because people want to be part of something great and they want to be part of something. So if you can convince them that you're paying attention to them and that they're part of the development process and that this application is a little bit theirs, they're going to become wonderful ambassadors for you. I mean, they'll go to their friends and say, yeah, see this feature on page 3? I actually recommended that. You know, I'm the reason that's there, and that's fantastic.
Hmm.
Do you
I
have more
think
to add to that?
Well, I think that's a really complex question about finding those focus group participants. I think if you can identify your target market and really hone in on that subset of users, I think hitting the pavement is almost a really good way to go. Because being able to get in face to face with those people is going to be super important. So
Cool.
yeah, it's going to be different for every different market group, but yeah, you want to. Your ideal users is ones that you can get in contact with and start having those discussions and seeing if they're interested in becoming part of that initial launch.
Okay, great. David, does that answer your question for you? Let us know, or just put a follow-up in there, and we'll pick it up in a second. The next question is, how does the minimum viable product approach help meeting budget limitations without letting anyone down? Question mark. If possible. This is an awesome question. And yeah, budget.
Budget. There's
budget
always more software than budget.
That's right. So that being in the software development business now for 4 years in this space, I can give you one truth, and that is that there will always be more features required than budget available. It doesn't matter if you hire developers at $5 a day from outer Keokuk in the back quarters of Bolivia. You will still run out of budget before you run out of features. It's just a truth of the world, and that's a sad fact of life. Doing an MVP helps you mitigate this, and the reason that it helps you mitigate it is that by doing an MVP, you can really pick 3 things. You can pick features, you can pick budget, and you can pick time, and you have to optimize for 2 of those, or 1 of those even. So, but by building an MVP and getting it out there, what it means is that once you get it out there, you've got more chance to actually earn some money off this thing. And if you can get it out there and start earning money, then it's actually a lot easier to allocate more budget. And that's really the key thing behind building an MVP is let's get this thing launched, you know, and if you can get it launched, we can earn some income off it. If we can earn some income off it, we can afford to do more development. And actually, when Reinteractive's team are building MVP products, that's actually the driving, you know, vision, I guess, or goal that the developers have in mind. How can we actually build this to a point where people can use it? And we really need to get it to that point as fast as possible. And by removing as many features as possible from that first version means that you can start earning money with it. And once you earn money with it in any company, any corporate environment, you're going to be in a situation where the finance team are more interested to give you more money because now you're bringing in revenue. You're not just a cost center, you become a profit center. And that works for any size company, from one person with a startup idea all the way up to multinationals. Getting that product into production, getting it out there and being an MVP is the easiest way to solve budgetary concerns because then you can get more budget. James, what do you think?
I think you've
all day.
You have nailed it, and with that question, because you're right. There is always going to be more features than there is budget, and yeah, if you can launch earlier and start getting that validation, if people can start starting to pay for it or showing that they're loving using the product and that it really has legs, then that gives you a lot more confidence to go for a bigger build. And that's one of the key things is an MVP, you might learn that you've built the wrong product, and it's much better to do it with a small MVP than a massive product. So yeah, I think it's a key to the approach. You need to do an MVP to help with your budget limitations.
Yeah, we actually also covered that idea of switching direction with the MVP in our first webinar. So if you haven't seen that, it would be a good idea to have a look at that. But yeah, you know, you don't want to be $200,000 into a build and then realize that you've got the wrong target market because you've launched and no one wants to use it because you've done no MVP. You'd much rather find that out after 30,000 or even, you know, we have this I don't want to spruik our products too much, but there are areas out there, and we are one of the companies that offer this, and other companies do as well, where they do like a UX intensive development process. You know, it's a fixed price. It's usually like ours is under $10,000, and it's, you know, a few weeks long, and we build for you a clickable, usable prototype of your application. Now, getting $10,000 into an MVP and then finding out that no one in your target market wants to use it is much better than getting 50 or 100 grand into it and finding that out. So getting something like that in place really handles it. And I guess the other thing on the MVP, the really key thing, is it's a massive risk mitigation. It's going to reduce your risk and your exposure in terms of investment. All right, well, we're at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much for sticking with us. We don't have any more questions in the list, and I think we should end off and try and stick to time. Thank you very much to James for, and Chloe, obviously, for the hard work in putting the list together. And we'll have this up on our YouTube channel soon for people to be able to watch and listen. Thank you, Liam, for saying thank you. That's awesome. And the next seminar is going to be developing and launching your MVP. So how do you actually go about doing what we preach, and getting information on that. And we'll be sending out when that is and how it is. And yeah, tell your friends about this MVP series and get them involved. The more people that understand about MVPs, the easier I think everyone's life is going to be in terms of getting approval for budgets and moving things forward like that. So yeah, thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Chloe. Thank you very much, everyone who's attended. And yeah, that's it. Have a good day.
Cool. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.